I had no influence whatsoever on the Peregrine Conference, and on the contrary, but it had a huge effect on me. All I had going in was my obsession about the tundra peregrines that concentrated on the beaches near my home in Texas each October. The thought of their eventual demise bothered me. It was in the wind. People were talking about it. My friend Steve Herman, my dear friend to this day, had written to say he was going to the conference and thought I should consider it. At that point, I didn't know there was a conference, but I did consider it, and so I went and found lifelong friends, many of whom became RF members, and I saw them at the meetings most years as the details of the Peregrine's problem and its solutions and all the various offshoots of raptor conservation research got going. The absolutely most exciting moment of the conference, and I'm glad nobody mentioned this, was the presentation of Ian Prest, who used superimposed photographic slides to match up the geography of population declines among bird-eating raptors with the distribution of cereal farming in Great Britain. You remember that?
Yeah.
Each pair of slides was a near perfect fit. He'd put one in and he'd put one in behind it, which you can't do on a carousel. But
No PowerPoint?
nope. Finally, and everybody was mesmerized because they really were perfect fits. Finally, he popped in a slide showing the decline of the European buzzard, a mammal eater, and he got no fit at all. But at that point, he replaced the cereal farming slide with one showing the distribution of gamekeepers. Like the others, it fit quite convincingly. It was so beautiful. This was a stunning moment and acutely pivotal in my short life, and I believe in the lives of all who attended. Ian Prest and Derek Ratcliffe showed us quite elegantly that the peregrine's dilemma was a matter for science, and that science itself was a straightforward and approachable endeavor. Up to that point, I had thought that real science existed in the intellectual ozone, mainly out of reach. But here were a couple of guys that communicated within the relaxed mind space of everyone there. I don't know how relaxed we were. I cannot express how moved I was by the presentation of those two scientists. There had been lots of prior explanations flying around the room, and suddenly the field was profoundly narrowed. Within a year or so, Ratcliffe demonstrated that eggshell thinning had begun in 1947, and it wasn't long before DDE was experimentally revealed as the cause. It was during this period of the late 1960s and early 1970s that the first photographs of our planet were taken from space, and people began to more fully consider the biosphere as an integrated whole, an evolutionary masterpiece that could be damaged, and that some forms of damage could be really powerful and yet really difficult to detect. I am of the opinion that the Peregrine Conference was a functional working part of this awakening. The conference was the first step toward the realization that tiny unseen molecules could spoil the global ecosystem for some of its key inhabitants. One of the best statements of the overall effect of the conference was offered by Derek Ratcliffe here in Sacramento in 1985. He said, "It focused people's minds and gave them a common sense of purpose." And it did it, and did it ever. After the conference, there was an enormous diversity of response, and all of it was directed toward the single goal of nailing down the problem peregrines were having and making it go away. From field biology to chemistry and physiology and experimentation and population ecology and advocacy, and ultimately to species restoration. Such purpose and energy and such success, and all the good lessons from all that great effort. I think it might have gone differently if some other form of life had been threatened, but that molecule was messing with the wrong species, by God. It was messing with the peregrine. And the room was filled with such passion for the Peregrine, I cannot tell you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Granger. Clayton?
Well, those years were years of very fond memories, and we were asked to speak about a few things, perhaps people that are now gone that were there then, and I noted that there were 63, Dan, participants at the conference. They broke down into 3 different groups. There were those that were the chairs of the various sections and panels. There were 9 of those, 8 of whom are now have passed away. There were the participants, 41 of those, and the official observers, and Granger and Steve were in that group, and there were 13 of those. And I don't know how many of those are gone, but I tallied up, it looks like about 75% of the people that were there have now passed away, and so within the next probably decade and a half, the whole group will be gone. So that will be a passing of, I think, a kind of an important era. It was mentioned that Joe Hickey treated Dan as a colleague, and I have good memories of Joe. In 1959, I wrote him as a student and told him I was interested in peregrines and I'd like to get a copy of his article that came out in the Yacht. And I got a copy back which said on it and stamped in a stamp there, last copy, do not remove from file. And then he wrote on it to CMW from JJH. When I retired, I gave all of my, and in my era we used reprints. We used typewriters then too. But we used reprints, and I gave all my reprints. I had about 7,500 of them to the Peregrine Fund, but I kept that one. And it means an awful lot to me to remember that. Steve mentioned the DDT use of spraying it around, and I remember just after World War II, maybe you guys remember this too, the coming down the streets and spraying garbage cans with DDT, and we'd run out and run around in the fog. It was just a big fog hanging out there by the garbage cans, and grab the flies as they fell dead. But those are sort of precursors to this whole era. Derek Radcliffe has been mentioned many times, and I don't know how well any of you knew Derek, but he was staying with us for a while, and he wanted to go look at hummingbirds up at Bear Refuge. And true to the tradition of the British, he wore a tie and a suit coat. And we went out to look at hummingbirds, and Derek was always an inspiration to me because he was so forward-looking. And the chart that was shown on the board here of the eggshell thinning, marvelous contribution that Derek made. There are also, the book that's out there, if you haven't looked at it, you should recognize that there's much more than peregrines in there. There are papers on harriers, on ospreys, on populations. And one of the things that we were asked to do at the conference, for those of us that had different ideas, were to explore various avenues that might be responsible for the decline. And so there's quite a few papers in there about that sort of thing. And now I believe that probably Joe organized that conference, and maybe Dan Anderson can address this better than I, but in 1962, the International Ornithological Congress was held at Cornell, and Joe was there, and they had a meeting. I didn't attend that meeting. I was more interested in George Watson's finding. George was about to describe a new subspecies of peregrines from the Cape Verde Islands, and so he and I spent some time together talking about it, and I wasn't even aware of the conference, but Joe met with a bunch of Europeans. Do you remember that, Dan, that they were there at the IOC?
Which year?
62.
Oh, I wasn't
Oh, you weren't born then, that's right. Yeah. And anyway, I think Joe came into his conference with maybe a little bit of a bias toward what he thought was taking place, because the Europeans, I think, were ahead of us on this. When I say us, I mean those in North America. And I think he may have come with a bit of a already conviction that DDT was to blame. I don't know. That's just one of my thoughts. But the idea that the Peregrine was in trouble is reflected. I just found this in a little article out of the Chicago Tribune. The date on it is Saturday, March 22nd, 1969, and it says, Falcon faces extinction. The Peregrine Falcon is facing extinction in North America, and it goes on to talk a little bit about it. Well, that was sort of the milieu that we worked in. And I remember giving a talk, a seminar, and I mentioned this fact that some of us were afraid, some were afraid that it was going to go extinct, and there was a flyer out in the hallway. It was at a university, and I mentioned that, and I went out after, and here I saw this flyer, and it written on a big, bold, black pencil, there are false prophets among us. And so I was one of those false prophets, I guess, because I kind of thought maybe it was going to go into extinction. But in fact, I think it's going to take a bit more than what was exposed to it. It's a very adaptable bird. I guess that's about all I can add to the conversation. We've probably gone over our time, but I would encourage you all to take a look at the conference report that Joe wrote, because there's a lot of good data in there, and it goes beyond peregrines. It goes to a variety of things, and a lot of hypotheses were proposed. Now, there were some rather negative things that happened, not at the conference, but after when I retired, I went through my letters and was throwing them away and found one. Steve mentioned some economic entomologists, and I don't want to cast aspersions on them, because they work hard. They do their best. They're trying to deal with insect problems and feeding humans and you name it. But I got a letter there, and I think he was at UC Davis, if I remember. And in there, I won't use the language he used. We're in mixed company here, but he said that I was a lying, SOB. You know what that means. And as I read that over, I thought, there's a lot of passion on both sides of this issue, and there was a lot of passion then. And I'm glad that my passion was on the side of the Peregrine, because I think it was a well-spent passion. So thanks.